It's 5:25. We'll begin in another 5 minutes. All right, so hey there, hello everyone, good evening, and welcome back to another session on MEG2. And
Good evening, sir.
good evening. We are ready to go. Let me have another couple of minutes. There are people trying to log in. Let me just let them in. We are ready to go. And today we'll be dealing with T.S. Eliot's Murder in the Cathedral. So gear up for that. We'll get started in a minute. Okay, then we are ready to go close to a 50 people. It's 5:30:31. Let's get started. And today, as I had promised you yesterday, we'll be dealing with Murder in the Cathedral by T.S. Eliot. And before we delve deep into the content of the play and the critical discussions of the play, I have quite a lot of critical terms, historical backgrounds, and technical terms to share with you before we get started. So, just in case we don't get to complete the play in 2 hours, don't worry. Tomorrow, maybe I'll take another 15 to 20 minutes if required to complete the play. Because generally, whenever I discuss Murder in the Cathedral in an offline class, it takes close to 3 hours. It's quite difficult to condense that into two because there are plenty of background information and allusions that is forced into our discussions, and it is difficult to carry on without that. So I won't be able to do justice if I try to rush through the portions. I'll try to nap it up by two, but if not, I'll continue from where I leave by tomorrow. Okay, so on getting started, unlike say the last couple of sessions, today, fortunately, or the other way around, you will have to bear with a couple of hours of lecture of mine. That introductory song was all that was there in terms of a video footage or a distraction or a digression. That apart, maybe a couple of minutes while you fill in your attendance, you'll have to kindly bear with my lecture today because there are a lot of things to be discussed when it comes to Murder in the Cathedral. And it is a historical play, it's a poetic drama, and there are a lot of Greek resemblances. And Eliot himself was a workshop critic, which means he has his own theories, which we need to at least touch through, if not go into detail. So I'd be taking some time to brief these things to you as students of literature and drama. It is quintessential that you are aware of some basic concepts. So I'll be spending time initially on that, and at a later half, we'll come back and deal with the basic discussions as usual. It is similar to what we did yesterday regarding Pygmalion, but different in the sense that I'll be giving a bit more broader overview, and I'll be discussing in detail about the entire discussions that surrounds the play. So in that sense, it's more of a lecture. So kindly bear with me, and of course, towards the fag end, irrespective of where I stand, we can have a discussion over the last 5 or 10 minutes. So don't worry about that. There'll definitely be time for your queries. Okay, so let's get started. We have close to 60 people in the house now. I hope there are no more people to come. So, yep, let's just get started. A few technical terms to familiarize with you, just in case you're not familiar with it. And I've posted one in the chat box. You may go Google that. Tedeum means a hymn praising in appraisal in a religious way, in a sort of an expression of thanksgiving or exaltation. Generally, something like, "We praise thee, O Lord, for all the good that you have done for me." So, Tid Dune TDM or KDM, whichever way you pronounce that. It is a technical term that you need to be familiar with before we delve deep into that play. And similarly, I would also like to introduce to you the concept of dramatic literature. It's another thing that you need to be aware of. So, what do we mean by dramatic literature? You are students of British drama, and we have learned quite a few plays by now. And even while discussing Shakespeare, I had told you that Shakespeare never wrote his plays with the intention of generations to brood on his works and abuse him. He had simply written his plays with the primary intention of performing them. So generally, plays are written to be performed. There is no two ways about that. I'm sure all of you would agree with me that plays are and were written to be performed. And being students of literature, theory, criticism, we may show some interest in the literary content of the text, which is in fact the manuscript of the play, or what we may also call as the script, or whatever. So as literature students, we have an interest towards the literary work, but otherwise, a play is basically a performance. But then there were also playwrights who felt that plays should also be regarded for the literary value. The sort of literary value is something that they emphasize. Just a second, a few messages coming in the chat box. Today's topic, we are dealing with The Murder in the Cathedral by T.S. Eliot, Lakshmi. And I'm giving an overview of a few technical terms, some historical overview, and a lot of other things. So we started with TDM, and now I'm talking about dramatic literature. So what is dramatic literature? Dramatic literature implies a contradiction in that literature originally meant something written, and drama meant something performed. So the moment we say drama, we envisage an act being performed on stage. So the moment we say literature, it's something written. So dramatic literature might abuse you a little bit, but then um, it is also important that there were plays which were written, and we look back at it for its literary value. So there is this contradiction that literature is meant to be written, whereas drama is meant to be performed. And most of the problems and much of the interest in the study of dramatic literature stems from this contradiction. Even though a play may be appreciated solely for its qualities as writing, greater rewards probably happen to those who remain alert to the volatility of the play as a whole. So it's a performativity that gains rewards, but then uh, the quality of writing also needs to be appreciated. So in order to appreciate this complexity in drama, however, each of its elements like acting, directing, staging, etc., should be studied so that its relationship to all the others can be fully understood. And often, when we speak about dramatic literature, the study is based on how the literary quality of a play stands the tests of the time. And one person who is popularly known because of this sort of an approach is J.L. Stein, an Anglican critic. J.L. Stein, Styan, and his series of study in plays is called as Modern Drama in Theory and Practice. There are plenty of volumes of these books available. You may go back and Google it later. So J.L. Steyn's Modern Drama in Theory and Practice is one such significant work that we discuss about, and that gives an overview on how the play should be, how and why the plays must be studied for its literary value. So I'd like to introduce Tian to you a little bit as well. And okay, more people coming in. Just give me a second. Let them in. All right. Okay. So yeah. So that's another thing, and um, another critical discussion that I'd like to initiate at this point of time before moving on to our context, that is T.S. Eliot and his play, is I'd like to slightly digress for the next 5-10 minutes, and I'd like to uh, take you to a poem, an epic poem written by uh, John Milton. All of you may have been familiar with this in MEG 1. You would be learning glimpses of that. The poem is titled Paradise Lost. I'm sure most of you would have probably written some assignment on the basis of that, or at least you would have gone through this name, you would have been familiar with this. There are two parts, in fact, Paradise Lost and Paradise Regained. So, to begin the session with, my primary question for you is why did John Milton write something like Paradise Lost? What is the primary purpose, or what led Milton, who was a fervent nationalist, mind you, who was part of Oliver Cromwell's protectorate, is also regarded as father of journalism because of his pamphleteering, including Areopagitica. So, why do you think Milton got into writing the epic Paradise Lost?
Sir, because of the age he lives in Puritan
Mhm.
age, it is obviously that in some enhancement of religious type of subject, and also with the uh, court ideology where Milton grows up, and type of concentration on religious subject also, and also his decreasing health and lost his eyesight. These are the reasons for the he wrote the Paradise Lost.
All right, good observation. Good observation. Thank you, Satyendra. There are also people in the chat box who have agreed with you. Shaila Priya says that when he lost his eyesight, English nationalism, yes, Anish, that's a good point. He regrets himself not utilizing his good days and so on and on and on. So,
So
yes,
could it be because of restoration? Because he lost the political scene was changing, and they brought back the king, which monarchy, which was not to his liking.
yes, good observation, Nirubama. That was also a reason. It was because of restoration. Oliver Cromwell's protectorate was overthrown. The Puritan state was, in a way, disturbed, and people like Milton felt that such an ideal state should come, and that also forced him to write Paradise Lost. And I think he had lost his eyesight later, not when he wrote Paradise Lost. He had begun the writing already, and maybe before publication, perhaps he lost his eyesight. He required a type, what do you call a typewriter and a person, an assistant, to copy it down. That's true. And Anish, I'm really fascinated by your answers in most of the sessions. It so happened that I have something in my mind and I try to put it into perspective, and it really helps me that when I make my students brainstorm and finally I give them something different and they're like, wow. But then you are already in that wow position. Whenever I've been noticing this for quite a while now, whenever I ask you something, your answers are somewhat matching with mine. Our wavelengths match quite well. All right, it's really a pleasure to see that. Okay, so speaking about Milton, he was a fervent nationalist. And from a post colonial glance at this particular point of time, if we look back, we'll see that the colonizing mission was established by the Anglicans, saying that they were superior. Remember Rudyard Kipling's The White Man's Burden. So he says that the white man is the chosen one by the God to civilize these uncultured savages who are being colonized. So that sort of a notion is something the Westerners put forward. As part of that, they claim that their religion is superior, monolithic way of religious affinity is good. Their religion, English, is to be propagated, and on and on and on and on. So one problem that England had right from the beginning, if you study the history of English literature, for instance, you would study that this Anglo-Saxon Jute Norman history, where you would learn that the Britishers initially, or the British forefathers initially, were all nomadic people. They were tribal people. They played with bow and arrow. They were in warring zone, and they had conflicts, internal uh, clan clash conflicts, and they slowly emerged as a civilization as we regard them later. Of course, the Renaissance flared their tempers and made them a bit more respectable fellows in terms of scholastic nature. But nonetheless, John Milton was always disturbed, being a fervent nationalist, he was always disturbed with the fact that, unlike the West or the East, when I say the West, the Greeks have a very great epics like Iliad and Odyssey to look back to. You come to East, you have Mahabharata, Ramayana, and so on to look back to. The Britishers did not have an epic to look forward to. And while the civilizing mission was going on various parts, there were people within the nation questioning this white man's burden theory and or similar theories, and on what grounds can we rule somebody was a question that was raised against the imperialistic Britain. And as a fervent nationalist, irrespective of whether he was living in a Puritan state or not, uh, John Milton was deeply disturbed by this distancing of British culture. So he wanted to have a strong claim for the British supremacy over the world. And he had planned it decades ago. It's not that he wrote Paradise Lost and published it in 1667. He had started working on it from 1630s onwards. For example, you take a look at that elegy when his friend Edward King passed away. Lycidas, Lycidas, or the subsequent works of poetry that he wrote after that. So he was preparing for this epic, and he had started writing Paradise Lost. And of course, it took a long time, 2 decades or so, to get it published. But then the intention behind the writing of Paradise Lost was that in Paradise Lost, the primary claim that Milton makes is of Adam and Eve and their fall from heaven, and all men being their antecedents or precedents. So when you speak about the fall from Eden, and when you say that this is our epic and Adam and Eve are our forefathers, he is creating I don't say pseudo, but he's creating an alter history to bank on for the British. So when they look back at it, all the Britishers become the children of God. Adam and Eve are children of God, and they get abandoned from the Garden of Eden. So all the Christians become the children of God, and that gives them that legitimacy to conquer the world and to teach them Christianity and good manners and civics. So this is one thing behind John Milton. The reason why I digressed for a couple of, for say 5 to 6 minutes, telling you Milton's story, is because I wanted to take you to T.S. Eliot. T.S. Eliot was born in America, and later in 1915 he migrated to London, and he converted into Anglicanism. Initially, he was an agnostic, and again introducing two technical terms to you, just in case you are not familiar with it. Okay. Two terms, just in case you're not familiar with it. One is agnostic, and the other is atheist. You may all be familiar with the term atheist. Atheist is somebody who says that God does not exist at all. There are people who say there is no God. Deivam illa ennu parayunna oral atheist, nirishwaravadiya. So who is an agnostic? An agnostic is somebody who does not go to the extent of blasphemy by saying that God does not exist. Blasphemy, Deva Nishedam, Deva, Gurta Dosham, whatever it is. Yeah, critiquing the God. So, an agnostic does not go to that extent of blasphemy. Rather, an agnostic does not believe that God exists, does not even believe that God does not exist. He takes the medial stance saying that there may be some superpower in this world, but as I have not seen that power, as I have not had direct rational exposure to that power, I do not conform to it. Again, a religion free living, but at the same time does not completely dismiss the possibilities of a divine entity. That's called an agnost. So, Eliot was initially an agnost, and later he converted into Anglicanism. And ever since he converted into Anglicanism, we can see that his work also started reflecting faith in immense magnitude. Faith, or to be very specific, Christian faith, became central to T.S. Eliot's writings. And especially when it comes to his plays, we must at this point also note that T.S. Eliot was primarily T.S. Eliot was primarily a poet. In paper one, MEG 1, you would have come across a few of his poems, including The Wasteland, Four Quartets, and so on. So he was primarily a poet. He was well regarded as a poet. And as I've told you several times, he was also a critic, what Matthew Arnold later calls as a workshop critic, a practicing poet and a critic. He had his own critical works stating theory of literature and art. At the same time, he also ventured out to playwriting, and the uniqueness in his playwriting was that he wrote his plays in verse, and that's why it became unique. And most of his plays, we can see this religious flavor coming in. And just before going there is a question by Gigi Mole. I've already explained it, but I can explain it to you in Malayalam once again. Gigi Mole, atheist എന്ന് വെച്ചാൽ നിരീശ്വരവാദി. അയാൾ ദൈവം ഇല്ല എന്ന് പറയും. ദൈവമേ ഇല്ല, ഈ ലോകത്ത് ദൈവം എന്നൊരു ശക്തിയേ ഇല്ല, ദൈവവും ചെകുത്താനും ഒക്കെ നിങ്ങളുടെ മനസ്സിന്റെ സൃഷ്ടിയാണ്, ദൈവവും ഇല്ല ചെകുത്താനും ഇല്ല, ഈ ലോകത്ത് അങ്ങനെ ഒരു സ്പിരിറ്റേ ഇല്ല എന്ന് പറയുന്ന ആളാണ് എത്തിയിസ്റ്റ്. അഗ്നോസ്റ്റ് എന്ന് പറയുമ്പോൾ ദൈവം ഇല്ല എന്നും അയാൾ പറയുന്നില്ല, ദൈവമുണ്ട് എന്നും അയാൾ പറയുന്നില്ല. എനിക്ക് നേരിട്ട് കാണുന്നതിനെ ഞാൻ വിശ്വസിക്കൂ, അല്ലെങ്കിൽ റാഷണലായ എക്സ്പീരിയൻസുകളെ ഞാൻ അംഗീകരിക്കൂ എന്നുള്ളത് കൊണ്ട് ഈ ദൈവം എന്ന് പറയുന്ന സാധനത്തെ ഞാൻ നേരിൽ കണ്ടിട്ടില്ലാത്തതുകൊണ്ട്, ഇടപഴകിയിട്ടില്ലാത്തത് കൊണ്ട് ഞാൻ ദൈവത്തെ തിരസ്കരിക്കുന്നു. ഞാൻ ഈ പറഞ്ഞ ഒരു നിരീശ്വരവാദ ജീവിതം തന്നെ തെരഞ്ഞെടുക്കുന്നു. ബട്ട് അറ്റ് ദ സെയിം ടൈം, അൺലൈക്ക് നിരീശ്വരവാദീസ്, ഞാൻ ദൈവത്തെ തള്ളി പറയുന്നില്ല. നിങ്ങൾക്ക് ദൈവവിശ്വാസം ഉണ്ടെങ്കിൽ വെൽ ആൻഡ് ഗുഡ്, നിങ്ങൾ ദൈവത്തെ വിശ്വസിച്ചോളൂ. എനിക്ക് പ്രപഞ്ചത്തിലൊരു സ്പിരിറ്റ് ഉണ്ട്, അല്ലാതെ പ്രപഞ്ചം ചുമ്മാ ഉണ്ടായതല്ല, ഇത്രയും ക്രിയേഷൻസ് യുണീക്കായിട്ട് ഉണ്ടായെങ്കിൽ അതിന്റെ പിന്നിലൊരു ശക്തി ഉണ്ടാവാം എന്നൊക്കെ ഞാൻ അക്നോളജ് ചെയ്യുന്നുണ്ട്. പക്ഷെ ഒരു ഏകദൈവ ആരാധനയിലേക്കോ അല്ലെങ്കിൽ ഒരു ഓർഗനൈസ്ഡ് റിലീജിയൻ സെറ്റപ്പിലേക്കോ പ്രെയർ സെറ്റപ്പിലേക്കോ ഞാനില്ല എന്ന് പറയുന്ന ആളെയാണ് നമ്മൾ അഗ്നോസ്റ്റ് എന്ന് വിളിക്കുന്നത്. I hope that clarifies it for you. Is it a double standard? It depends on where you stand, Atulya. I would say that's a bit more a democratic stance, because if you have to reject something, you should have a solid proof. And any such spiritual things is up to the individual. There is this popular analogy that's often drawn. Can you see electricity? Asks the religious people. Can you see electricity? Can you show me electricity? Can you touch electricity? You can feel the shock, but can you touch electricity? So God is like that, or spirit of religion is like that. That's what religious people say. So an atheist completely dismisses this by saying that there is no God, all is rubbish. You say you saw a ghost, it's just a delusion in your mind. That's what an atheist says. An agnostic is rather skeptical, and he does not want to completely dismiss anything or be hurtful to anybody. More often than not, we see this warring zones between atheists and what do you call religious people. The same happens. You go to the Facebook page in Malayalam called Yuktivadi, or you listen to series of lectures by R. Ravichandran, who was assistant professor in University College Trivandrum. Currently, he's working in some government women college, Polytechnic Trivandrum. So listen to Ravichandran sir's lectures. He constantly dismisses the claims of religious books, including the Holy Bible, the Quran, and the Mahabharata. So there are people like him who go on bluntly dismissing any arguments. But then there are people who would like to cling on to their religious beliefs. Well, I am a non-conformist. I do not subscribe to this organized religion crap. But at the same time, I'm someone who would like to say, if you have belief, well and good, you can get along with that. I can give you another classic example without hurting anybody. Way back in 2013 14, because 2013 is the year in which I post graduated in English literature. And I started teaching in a college on an hourly basis much before my results came. And then I also taught in a parallel college during Sundays. And um, while I taught there, uh, it was then that I cracked the NET, which is the eligibility to become a college professor in terms of pure terms. And when I cracked net, the next class I went to my students, I distributed sweets to them. And in parallel college, Sunday batch for MA, like you, it was a mixture group. There were people of various ages, 40, 45, 50, 20, 30, and all. So there was a nun, a Catholic nun, who was my student. And when I gave the sweet and told or declared that I have cracked net, this lady told me that I knew that you would get net, sir. And the reason that she told is something that is a bit amusing. She said that on the day when you wrote your net exam, I was invigilating the net exam elsewhere. I was part of the invigilation duty. And I suddenly thought of you. I thought that someone like you, as talented as you, should deserve this and you should become a teacher as soon as possible. That will help the academic clientele. And I had this, I don't know what you call for I had this mala or konda, whatever you call that. I had this cross with me. And I kept on praying to Jesus that may you crack NET exam. And she claimed to everybody who were there in the class that it's because I prayed in the examination hall that sir passed NET. Uh, Primarily, I felt it as an insult. I did sarcastically tell that to her, saying that, I have burnt midnight oil preparing for the NET exam. I've put in all my efforts. I've studied hard. And I've referred to the previous year question papers. I've referred a lot of books. And it is due to my hard work that I have been able to crack that, which I would still claim because I cracked NET 8 to 9 times between these, say, almost a decade. And she would not agree. She would say that it's because she prayed that I cracked net. But then later I felt that there is nothing wrong in what she said. She believes in her faith, and there is no reason why I should dismiss her or disregard her faith. It could also be one possible hand that was extended to me, possible. So that's the stance that an agnost takes, Atulya. We can't say that an agnost is a double standard fellow, but maybe because he cannot validate both, we cannot validate both, we take a middle way stance. And even though we take a middle way stance, we are biased towards non-conformism. And we believe that, especially in my case, I would say that organized religion has a lot of problems. I'm not speaking against the religious books or the good things stated in that. But then the way these middlemen, that is the pastors or the mullakas or whoever, the priests, deities, whoever, the way they thwart these religious texts to their own selfish motives is something that I disagree with. And I'm sure most of the atheists and agnostics do that. For example, when we speak about Tirupati, you all know Tirupati, what it is famous for. Tirupati is famous for embalming our head. We sacrifice our hair to the god. We tonsure our head, Tonsure, just in case you're not sure about what is the English word for motadical. Motadical in English is tonsure. Yeah, you tonsure your hair going to Tirupati. But then there is a huge hair mafia behind this. In order to make wig, this hair can be used, and there's a huge mafia. Even the offerings made in the form of abhishekam, especially milk abhishekas. So the same applies if you go to St. Anthony's Church, Kalur, every Tuesday. Now it's not possible, but if you remember, if you had gone there before, there would be a lot of candle sellers outside the church. So you would pay 5 rupees, 10 rupees, buy the candle, and you would lit it and you would pray to the Saint Anthony or the God or whoever you believe in. And you would be praying, and there will be a guy with a sack coming and sticking at you as in, put the candle there, put the candle there. And what he does, the moment you put the candle, it's barely burnt, barely half burnt. He puts that candle into the sack, and this is recycled and it again comes back to you at a later point of time. So the utility of religion by the organized religious preachers is something that these people have some problems with. And this is better explained in movies like Oh My God, starring Akshay Kumar and Paresh Rawal, or say movies like PK, and on and on and on and on. Okay, so we were digressing from the murder in the cathedral. That's a nice way of reminding the teacher too, Jennifer. That's a euphemistic way of reminding the person that, oh my God, you are here to teach murder in the cathedral, not agnosticism and atheism. All right, doesn't matter. I take it with a pinch of salt. Okay, so speaking about T.S. Eliot, he was initially a nonconformist, an agnost, and later he converted into Anglicanism, and ever since we can see the shades of religious ferventism in T.S. Eliot's plays. And again, speaking about his plays, we must also note that he's someone who wrote his plays in verse, and that's one thing I forgot to mention yesterday. Yesterday, while I was discussing evolution of theatre from Shakespeare to say George Bernard Shaw, I'm sorry. Yeah, one thing I forgot to mention yesterday was that in due course of time, drama became prosaic, perhaps from the Restoration period onwards to a certain extent, with the exception of John Dryden. The drama has had taken the evolution in terms of becoming prosaic as well. And by the time you reach Oscar Wilde, even the acts were cut down. 5-act plays were long and people were not that keen to waste time. So it even came down to 3 acts, 2 acts. What happened later, we'll talk later, maybe tomorrow or the day after. But nonetheless, prosaic dramas came into existence, which means dialogues came into existence. Verse dramas somewhat became extinct unless and until Shakespearean plays were reenacted or retold. So prose dramas came into existence. For example, if you read Pygmalion, it is a prose drama. It's not poetic in nature. So while theatre world was going into that prosaic mode, came T.S. Eliot, who was primarily a poet, who was a traditionalist to the core, who felt that theatre should go back to the verse theatre mode. And that's why I speak about dramatic literature as well. And unlike prose theatre, which is meant to be performed primarily, the advantage of verse theatre is also that it could be performed over the streams like radio. For example, the Murder in the Cathedral has been aired several times over the radio. If you go Google it, you would find a BBC version of the play. So that's another advantage that verse dramas, the verse dramas enjoy. And Eliot had his own mission behind writing such verse dramas. So we'll move on to that quite quickly. But before moving on to that, I'd like to discuss the theorist in T.S. Eliot, because you may need him in MEG 1, MEG 4, as well as MEG 5. Next year, when you come to learn literary criticism and theory, I'll be briefing tradition and individual talent and so on by Eliot next year. So even when you approach these texts, it's better to know the traditional standards held by T.S. Eliot. I'm not going deep into that. I'm just briefing it for you or for your understanding. I'm trying to make it as simple as possible. So like I told you, he was more of a workshop critic. And I'm just taking you on a tour of a few key essays written by T.S. Eliot. The first and foremost being Rhetoric and Poetic Drama, published in the year 1919 in a work called Selected Essays, which was later published as a collection in the year 1932. I'm sharing the titles in the chat box just in case you want to go back to it. Rhetoric and Poetic Drama, published in the year 1919 as an article, and later published in Selected Essays in the year 1932. So why is it significant? It analyzed dramatic speech in relation to the situation, the character's view on himself, and our view of the characters. I repeat, it analyzed dramatic speech in relation to situation, the character's view of himself, and our view of the characters. And uh, Eliot was so fond of monologues. Again, another attribute that we can see in his plays. And another work that we need to be familiar with is Possibility of a Poetic Drama, written again collection taken from the collection The Sacred Wood, published in the year 1920. So he had started discussions towards verse dramas revival way back in 1920. So in that work, he hints at the possibility of a public for poetic drama despite contemporary problems. Mind you, from 1919 onwards, during that era, we could see that the First World War broke out, and there were plenty of problems, especially existential problems that started to creep in. So he hinted at the possibility of the revival of poetic drama, and he said that there was a need to discover a new combination of dramatic elements. There's an underline there. He said that there's a need to rediscover, or to what you say, there is a need to what you say, there is a need to discover a new combination of dramatic elements. That is, what was existent had its own flaws, so we need to discover a new combination so as to make it exciting. Another work that you need to be aware of is A Dialogue on Dramatic Poetry, published initially in the year 1928, and later in selected essays that we have already spoken about in the year 1932. So, A Dialogue on Dramatic Essays by T.S. Eliot, dramatic poetry, A Dialogue on Dramatic Poetry. He asked whether a poetic drama was possible during his time. Given the socio-political scenario, he was contemplating whether poetic drama could be really materialized. And later, in another work called Poetry and Drama, published in the year 1950, and later in the book On Poetry and Poets, published in the year 1957, T.S. Eliot discusses the extent of his achievement in the play Prescribed for You, Murder in the Cathedral, and in particular considered the need for a flexible verse capable of presenting both the mundane and the profound. So that work, Poetry and Drama, is something that is significant to you, just in case you haven't completed writing your assignments on MEG 2. Please go back to that work and read it and make allusions. You can say that T.S. Eliot calls his verse, the design behind his verse play, like this. And he justifies the choice stating this. So you're not plagiarizing, you're citing. And the essay would look, or the answer would look a bit more convincing to the writer, to the evaluator. Also, it would look different from so many others who would have copied from the web or the study materials, for that sake. And another significant work, this is also a crucial work that we need to discuss at some point of time today. Another significant work that you need to go back to is The Three Voices of Poetry. Three Voices of Poetry, published in the year 1953, and it reappeared on Poetry and Poets in the year 1957. And Sony Abraham, no problems if you have submitted. You can have a better understanding and write well for your exams. Even for your final exam, Murder in the Cathedral is somewhat a sure bet. So you can prepare well and bring all these allusions together while you discuss that. So in The Three Voices of Poetry, he traced the range of poetic voices, from the poet speaking in his own voice, onto speaking through mouthpieces as in dramatic monologues, and finally to the full creation of characters in their own right. So he brings in three distinct poetic voices, and he tries to analyze and assess the effect of using these three strategies. And in his Poetry and Criticism, and later in his Plays and Criticism, while theorizing, he asked, what great poetry is not dramatic? And the drama he created was an alternative both to earlier attempts at a modern verse drama and to naturalistic prose of contemporary drama. And T.S. Eliot is considered an important dramatist because no other has preserved so long to construct both a theory and a series of poetic plays. Take a case of any of his plays, you could see that they are written in verse. And because he achieved a clearly successful place in the 20th century commercial theater, despite writing verse dramas. And he tried to give drama levels and dimensions comparable in language and structure to those of the novel. And he argued that naturalistic drama was too limited, particularly in its failure to explore spiritual experience, which was significant to him. And theatre offered Eliot the opportunity to achieve a wider audience than the printed page offered, that is, than his poetry could reach. And apart from all that, he also believed his poetic drama would tap a deeper emotional experience and would effectively portray reality at more than one level. Again, at this point, we must pause and discuss two more technical terms, and that is realism and naturalism. So, what exactly is the difference between realism and naturalism? Realism and naturalism. How do you distinguish or differentiate these two terms? And uh, put in simple words, realism is depicting what is as somewhat real as it is. For example, now it's COVID times. So, for example, somebody loses his source of income. Take the case of street vendors. So, a street vendor cannot go to work because curfew is imposed or triple lockdown is enforced. He's at home, say for 1 month, 2 months, his source of revenue is not there and he cannot pay his rent. His family starves. And finally, seeing that the COVID cases are intensifying, the family commits suicide. So, if this be made as a play or a novel, this can be called as a realist play or a realistic novel. But what a realistic play does not venture out to do, a naturalistic play or a novel does. So, what does a realistic or a naturalistic play does? What it does is naturalism asks questions. It probes into the who, what, why, when, where, and how. For instance, the same story. There is a street vendor. Because of COVID, he loses his job. He cannot go to his job. He starves and he dies. So, naturalist novels and poems ask questions like, who is responsible for this person's death? Is he himself responsible because he was not educated? Or is the society, the ruling party, say for example, the government responsible for this? Has governmental policies failed to serve the proletariat? So naturalism delves deep into the causes and reasons that has led to this plight of the protagonist. So that's how realism and naturalism differ. Again, for the vernacular audience, let me repeat the same in Malayalam. Realism എന്ന് പറയുന്നത് ഉള്ളതുപോലെ കാണിച്ചാൽ അത് റിയലിസമാണ്. ഒരാൾ അയാൾക്ക് ജോലി നഷ്ടപ്പെട്ട് അയാൾ പട്ടിണി കിടന്ന് മടുത്തിട്ട് ആത്മഹത്യ ചെയ്യുകയാണെങ്കിൽ അത് റിയലിസമാണ്. ഉദാഹരണത്തിന് ഞാൻ ഉദാഹരണത്തിലേക്ക് കടക്കില്ല, ഡയഗ്രസ് ചെയ്തു പോകും. നേരെ മറിച്ച് നാച്ചുറലിസത്തിലേക്ക് വരുമ്പോഴേക്കും ഇയാൾ മരിച്ചതിനെ, ഇയാളുടെ ഈ ദാരിദ്ര്യവും മരണത്തിനും അപ്പുറത്തേക്ക് ഇയാളുടെ ഈ ദാരിദ്ര്യത്തിനും മരണത്തിനും കാരണമായത് ആരാണ്? ഭരണകൂടമാണോ? അയാൾ തന്നെയാണോ? അയാളുടെ കുടുംബമാണോ? അയാളുടെ അയൽവാസികളാണോ? സമൂഹമാണോ? തുടങ്ങിയ മറ്റു പല കോണുകളിൽ നിന്നുമുള്ള വിശകലനം നടത്തുമ്പോഴാണ് അത് നാച്ചുറലിസ്റ്റ് നാടകമായി മാറുന്നത്. So, even when you study MEG 3, especially with regard to the rise of the novel, you come across these terms, realism and naturalism. Even when you go to the German landscape, you get to know a novel like Gustav Flaubert's Madame Bovary, which is a realistic novel. So, you may come across realism and naturalism while you learn literature. Again, plays like Arnold Wesker's Chicken Soup with Barley is another instance of naturalism. So you may go back to that and see how it fares as and when you get time. Let's continue with our T.S. Eliotic discussions. So Yeah. So his theory of drama is something that I've discussed so far. Also, another work that you need to bear in mind is tradition and individual talent. Tradition and individual talent is another essay where he discusses in detail his concepts of poetry, though not drama. But then he speaks about the need to have a historical sense. He also speaks about tabula rasa, or was it the other one? Okay, doesn't matter. There is this discussion on tabula rasa, which means a blank state of mind. So, yeah, T.S. Eliot speaks about historical sense, which needs to be kept in mind. He says that the current writers should have an idea of uh, what what happened before them, what preceded them, and they should have an idea of their predecessors and should follow in those lines. Okay, now uh, moving on from there. Um, yeah, let's speak about what necessitated the murder in the cathedral, or its writing. But before that, just a mention of a few plays by Eliot. I have already told you that he has written most of his plays in poetic language. A couple of those plays are, a few of those plays are plays like, well, I think I had saved it somewhere. Just give me a second. Mm, yeah, Sweeney Agonistus. It was not completed by him. That's where he began his experiment with verse drama. Then he went on to write a successful work like The Rock. Apart from that, he also wrote plays like The Confidential Clerk, which was again in verse format. So there were plenty of plays written by T.S. Eliot in verse format. And in some of those plays, you can also see the presence of the chorus, just like it is there in Murder in the Cathedral. And you must note that post their existence in the Greek tragedies, the chorus had almost become extinct. So T.S. Eliot brought them back with a different function, especially in Murder in the Cathedral. The gender of the chorus entirely takes a reversal. It is the women folk who form the part of the chorus in Murder in the Cathedral. So you may please note those points, and let's quickly move on to the background of the play, what led to the play. So as I told you, he became a religious person, and ever since he converted to Anglicanism, he started also writing plays with the Christian mission in mind. So, for example, the play like The Rock was written as part of a theatre festival, as asked by a Christian group of his. Jennifer, are you raising your hands for any queries, or is it by accident? Jennifer? Okay, I assume that it was by an accident.
Sir.
Okay, no props, no props. So yeah, he started writing, due to that sort of a mission, and the effectiveness of the rock and the choruses in the rock ensured that the device would become an important feature in his later plays, including the Murder in the Cathedral, and the occasion that necessitated it was the Canterbury Festival in the year 1935. And it was also partly a religious festival. Speaking about the Canterbury Festival, it had begun in the year 1928 with John Masefield's play, The Coming of Christ. Oh, still people are coming in. Okay, Anashwara Gopinath joins. All right. So in 1928, the festival kick-started with John Masefield's The Coming of the Christ. And it was not only the archdiocese of the country, it was also the most ancient Christian shrine in the land. and of course sanctified by none other than Thomas A. Becket. And Chaucer's Canterbury Tales was in itself a testimonial to the sacrifice. In MEG 1, if you go through Canterbury Tales, it happens at the sanctful place of martyrdom of Saint Becket. So you can go back to MEG 1 and have a look at the way he presents that. And naturally, as every year the plays were performed, it was connected with a saint or religious themes. And a few such instances where Binion's The Young King, or say, for example, a play like Tennyson's own version of Becket. Lord Alfred Tennyson wrote a play on Becket. And at this point of time, I'd like to share the link of the full play written by Lord Alfred Tennyson. You may not be interested, I know, to go through that play in entreaty. It's a long play written in 5 acts, so that also makes it difficult for you to read. But just in case you want to go back and read, I'm sharing the entire link of that play with you. And if you read that play, or even if you go find out its summary from some book, what you can do is you can have a comparative analysis. And apart from Tennyson's Becket, there is also a French version of Becket written by Jean Anouilh, a French surrealist playwright. And the play is also titled Becket. I'm sharing the name of the playwright in the link. You may go back and Google it. So you may compare these 3 plays if you feel like. And just in case you have written your assignments, no problem. You can still make use of that knowledge during your examination or probably during your interviews. Quite possible. Especially the nuns out there. I'm sure you would like to speak a bit more about spirituality than obscene works. So in that case, Becket is a resort for you, or Murder in the Cathedral is a resort for you. So if you focus on Chaucer, T.S. Eliot, Tennyson, and Anouilh, you can easily scrape through an interview by speaking about Becket and his heroics, or martyrdom, to
Excuse
be
me, sir.
precise. Yes,
Excuse me,
Nirupama?
sir.
So whenever you're free, whenever you have free time, can you please let us know a few good books for MEG 1 also and MEG
Oh,
3?
Nirupama, I think it was you who mailed me from Bangalore. Was it
Yes,
you?
sir. Yes,
Yeah,
sir. It
okay.
was.
Yeah. Apologies that I couldn't get back to you within the time frame because I'm held up with a lot of work from my college as well. We have a meeting tomorrow morning to discuss our annual planning. So that's why I was not able to get back to you promptly. But then, for those who were there from the first class, I had spent my first 2 hours discussing resources for you, including b-ok.org, where you can go back and type any keywords. You will get a list of books easily downloadable in PDF or EPUB formats. A few suggestions being history of English literature, because you asked. History of English literature, written by so many people, including Edward Albert, Arthur Compton Rickett, Emily Lua, and so on. And you can also look at a book like English Literature in Context, written by, just a second, Context, written by Paul Poplavsky. And I would suggest English literature in context just in case you are preparing for UGC NET, because it's simple. It has a detailed analysis of various crucial works. There are timelines and so on and on and on. I also refer to the study materials in EPG Pathshala. If you may want to go back and have a look at, there are plenty of PDFs and video materials available in EPG Pathshala. And if you are an avid reader, if you're not someone who's looking for mere summary, for example, if you like my classes, wherein I bring in a lot of allusion, digressions, and intertextuality, you may go back to BOK and look for Routledge editions, Oxford or Cambridge companions, and you may also look for, say, something like Harold Bloom's critical series. Yeah, these are a few references that I have for you. Even otherwise, you go to BOK, type the name of the authors in MEG1, you may get plenty of reference books related to that. So you can
Thank you, sir.
read that. It's only problem is that you will have to uh, spend some time figuring out which is good and which is substandard. That's all. But otherwise, I think that's one way out for you to get over that, because I don't have so much of time to spend on that regard. I had done that already in the first two sessions. So you can also contact people who were there in my first classes, including I think Sri Devi, Anju, and so on. And I'm sure they would have taken a note of the materials that I had given them back then. All right. So let's continue from where we left. Where did we stop? Yeah, I was talking to you about other playwrights like Lord Alfred Tennyson, Jean Anouilh, who has written a work called Beckett. You may refer to these works, and if required, you can compare these works to arrive at a consensus on how good or how bad these versions are. For example, Alfred Tennyson's Beckett is a bit more elaborate, and it has a lot of scenes which could have been avoided, because whenever Beckett becomes the protagonist, the focus is on Beckett's martyrdom, whereas Tennyson's Beckett, for instance, also deals with the king's uh, extramarital affairs and the duel between the queen and the other lady, and how Beckett intervenes in between that, and so on and on and on. So these things, according to the critics, could have been avoided, and 5 acts are too long for us to stick to that play. So in that sense, you can compare, especially speaking about Jean Anouilh's Beckett. He's a French playwright, and upon hearsay about Beckett and his martyrdom, he ventured on a fictitious account. So there are plenty of technical mistakes and anachronisms that creeps into Jean Anouilh's Beckett. And when we speak about T.S. Eliot's Beckett, of course, that too is not devoid of problems, and we'll discuss that when we start discussing the play, maybe a couple of minutes or say 5 minutes later. And I was speaking about the occasion. So the occasion was 1935 version of the Canterbury Festival, which was 7 to 8 years old by then. And the conditions were congenial to Eliot. He had a Christian subject and a Christian audience to be gathered at one of Europe's most famous Christian shrines. He had a director with whom he could work, and he had chance to further the cause of poetic drama. And the topics of martyrdom attracted him, as did the nature of the event and its significance for a modern audience. And that significance was brought out through the choruses, and the emotional structure of the play is based on them rather than on Thomas' exercise and self-analysis. For that was the point of the festival, the ordinary human response to the exceptional event, the martyrdom which repeats and reminds us of Christ's own sacrifice. And ritually, the play comments afresh on an act whose meaning may have been lost in the familiarity of the outward story. And that's the significance, or that's the occasion that necessitated the performance of the play. You may go back to Google and read a bit more on that. You can take that liberty later. And we'll take a couple of minutes break. Not you exactly, because you will be filling in the forms. But then after that, we'll come back and discuss or delve deep into the play. And as we began our session today, I had taken this apology that I may sometimes not complete the play today. It generally takes 2.5 to 3 hours, a minimum, to get completed. So I'm not sure I'll be able to complete it in 45-50 minutes. I'll try. If not, I'll continue from where I leave tomorrow. And I'll also discuss John Osborne's Look Back in Anger. It does not require 2 hours per se. It can be completed in an hour or two, or an hour and a half, that is. So we'll do that tomorrow. So apologies for that. Nonetheless, yeah, this is the background of the play. This is what necessitated the play. Also be aware of the term ritualistic drama that we discussed while we discussed the origin of Greek drama. So Eliot, in a way, tries to bring back that ritualistic fervor or flavor that theatre had. So ritualistic drama comes back to England during his times. It has other implications too, to which we shall come back later. So I'm sharing the Google Docs with you. You may mark your attendance, and we'll resume in a couple of minutes' time. You may use that time also to have a tea break or a pee break, whichever befits your occasion. During rainy days, pee breaks are quite frequent. I do understand that. So, a couple of minutes of break, have a cup of tea or coffee or whatever comforts you, and we'll come back and discuss murder in the cathedral. There are close to 85 people in the house. I can see that still only close to 50 people have marked your attendance. Please make sure you enter your attendance without fail. Also, enter your particulars and make sure your name has not been overwritten by anybody, especially those at the top. Please make sure nobody has superscribed your names. And for those who have technical issues, somebody please help. Anju or anybody volunteer to help them in filling their details. We'll continue shortly. All right, then I can see still close to 70 people have marked. Still, there are people pending. Never mind. Let's resume with our discussions on murder in the cathedral. So, when before we begin, I'd like to talk to you about the various possibilities or questions that you may face during your examination from this play. I'm sure that's something that you all like to hear a lot and you appreciate a lot. So even when I get mails from you, most of you ask me if I could share with you a few questions. In fact, I do have a reply that go back to the previous year question papers. It's easily available on the web. Type previous year question papers of MEG2, you will get up to, say, a dozen years back. So 25 questions, papers approximately. But nonetheless, uh, pertaining to Murder in the Cathedral, I'd like to address a few core questions before we get started, so that while I, deconstruct the play to you, you have this in mind and you can connect to the points that I'm trying to reveal in front of you. So, speaking about the play, your assignment question, for instance, is straightforward. It calls a spade, and it asks you discuss Murder in the Cathedral as a poetic drama. By poetic drama, they expect you to use the term verse drama. And mind you, it's VERSE, no matter how WORSE the play is. Yeah, the play could be verse, but then it's written in verse. And is it because it's written in verse that it's verse? Is something that we need to ponder about. But nonetheless, speaking about verse drama, your assignment question hopes that you understand the fact that poetic drama is verse drama, and T.S. Eliot has ventured on a poetic drama mission or a verse drama mission, and he has centered most of his plays in verse form. And he has also included chorus in most of those plays to have a mission. And one more point that I missed out in the first session is that while going back to the verse drama, T.S. Eliot's model, or the person T.S. Eliot admires or draws heavily from, is not the bard. He does not copy from William Shakespeare. Rather, he is more fond of a medieval play written in the year 15th century called Every Man. Do not confuse it with Every Man in His Humours by Ben Jonson. This play was written in the year 50, in the 15th century, and it is an allegorical play written in the Christian tradition. It's a morality play, to be more specific. So you may go back and read the summary if you want to, the play Every Man, and you may try to figure out what would have Eliot found inspiring in that. Nonetheless, T.S. Eliot was inspired by the style there, and he rejected the iambic pentameter form, even though he wrote at times in the Shakespearean form of what do you call the blank verse. Sometimes he also, or mostly he also resorted to free verse, which he found to be a better form. And at times in plays like Murder in Cathedral, he also brought in prose paragraphs in between, as and when he felt it was required. So they were poetic in nature, but there were a few portions here and there where he felt that dialogues are pretty necessary. For example, towards the fag end, where the murderers speak to the audience, it was written in prose because he felt a speech is more befitting than a poetic tongue at that particular juncture, because they are trying to explain the martyrdom of Becket. That's so wonderful to have a cup of coffee. And it's still free. All right. So speaking about, so that's what the question in your assignment asks you to do. So apart from that question, Murder in the Cathedral as a verse play, you may also be asked questions like the historicity of the play, or comment on the martyrdom of Becket, which is a straightforward question again, or how far T.S. Eliot has succeeded in portraying the historic event in his play. So these are some of the questions that you have to anticipate while you write your examination. So, to begin with, one of the principal questions would be the play's treatment of history. So, how does the play treat history in the play? By history, I mean the relationship between Beckett and Henry II. As I've already told you, before Eliot, Tennyson used the same plot in an elaborate manner, depicting the role between Henry II, his wife, concubine, Beckett, and so on. So, how different is it is something that you need to be aware of as well. So, one advantage that T.S. Eliot had is that in his play, he had the advantage of referring to a well known, highly dramatic story of a confrontation between two powerful personalities, both historically and spiritually significant. When I say spiritually, remember the year was 1935. The early 1930s saw the rise of Nazism and fascism across Europe. So, challenging the authority at once had religious as well as historical or political significance back then. And the story was taught to all as a central myth of the English nation. Although Eliot chose not to focus his action upon the conflict of King and Becket, it broods over the play, putting pressure on Thomas and making the spiritual dilemma real by providing it with its context in this world. The struggle between Henry and Thomas is embedded in the fabric of Eliot's play, despite its not being the action itself. The three expected temptations are all directly related to Henry: the good life enjoyed by those in favored circles of power, alliance with the king by acting as a chancellor again, joining the faction against the king by being a rebel. So Eliot does not deviate from tradition and history at all, but takes a narrative into another plane of existence entirely. He gives an entirely new dimension to the play in terms of power conflict and religious conflict, or religious belief to be more particular. The historical tale becomes an example not just of something happening in time, but a sequence leading to a timeless moment. In the opening of the play, the historical events are interwoven with emotional fears expressed by the chorus, and their reactions dominate our response. Later, in the meeting of Becket and the knights that comes from history, while the agonies of the chorus become ever more dramatically intrusive. The sermon is based on hints from contemporary records about the address which he actually gave, that is, Thomas actually gave, and it explores the central purpose of the play, the significance of a martyr in history. I told you the significance of the epic in British history when it comes to Paradise Lost. So it also reflects and looks back at the significance of a martyr in British history. The use of a historical subject facilitated the invention of a modern verse play, partly because an audience accepts heightened expression as natural to historical settings. And that is the basic significance of historical elements in that play. You must also remember that the play can also be seen as a traditional play with religious elements to it. So there are also questions that comes forth as the play asking you to interpret it as a religious play. And just in case the tea break was not sufficient enough, I just like to take a second of, or rather a minute of a pee break. I just join you back. I'm sorry, guys. Just a second. All right. So sorry for that break, unanticipated break. Nonetheless, let's continue from where we left. So we were speaking about the historicity of Beckett. So I also referred to you about the 1930s and how significant it was. So let's spend a little bit of time discussing the relevance of Beckett in 1930s. So the conflict of church and state has a significance beyond its medieval setting when you speak about 1930s. The demands upon an individual's allegiance for men of both important and lowly positions alike have as powerful an impact on the modern age as in any past period. In addition to exploring matters of conscience, the play examines the extent to which church should meddle in matters of state and vice versa. And these elements gave it added popularity in the 30s and 40s, although there is no identifiably propagandist angle as far as we are concerned. Thomas A. Beckett's story of the individual's confrontation of the state as a matter of conscience provided a powerful allegory for Europe in the 30s when Hitler's Nazi Germany was in the ascendant, or for that sake, Mussolini's Italy in terms of fascism. And Hitler had come to power in 1933, and the position of committed Christians under an evil reign was highlighted by Eliot for all to consider. We must also pre-anticipate the Jewish anti-Semitic attitude of Hitler later and the concentration camps. So audiences at the early touring production found a bold hero standing up to the political authority and tyranny. Freedom of belief was the challenge demonstrated by Thomas, and for this element, the play was highly regarded in the years prior to and during the Second World War. You must also remember that this play was performed almost 800 times ever since it was written. That just tells you the sort of popularity and demand that the play had. 800 times within the lifespan of T.S. Eliot. By now it would have had further the number. So yeah, so back then such a scenario existed, and until Second World War we could see that the resistance of Thomas was significant. So how far should the church and its people accept secular evil when it is embodied in the state itself is a question that came forth. It is as true now as it was then that the moral compromises a government may demand from its citizens may lead to acquiescence in evil. 1935 was a fearful year, and the anxious mood of the decade was perfectly caught by Eliot in the play. Appeasement of the dictators was offered as one response to the worsening situation and was implemented as a policy. A world wearied by the huge sacrifices of the 1914-18 war did not want to face a renewal. And this shrinking from unpalatable realities is powerfully conveyed in the opening chorus. The play closes with an affirmation of responsibility, an awareness, and a declaration that one cannot opt out from. The choruses are contrite over the earlier refusal to halt the drift of living and partly living. Mind you, that's another question that Beckett throws at the audience. The difference between living and partly or passively living. Existing and living, perhaps. Again, remember that popular Latin American writing that those who are apolitical would be questioned by the future generations to come. എൻ്റെ നാട്ടിലെ ഏറ്റവും അരാഷ്ട്രീയരായ ജനത വരും തലമുറകളാൽ ചോദ്യം ചെയ്യപ്പെടും എന്ന് പറയുന്ന remember that popular statement, and that came into question with T.S. Eliot. Not that T.S. Eliot was political. He was more religious than political, but knowingly or unknowingly, he addressed these concerns, this dilemma that people of Europe had back then. And in the play's confrontation between two attitudes, the demands of the flesh and those of the spirit, there was a moral challenge beyond religious allegiance. And the aspect of inner integrity fascinated contemporary audience, not least the command to do the right thing for the right reason. Further, the people were more interested in problems of destiny and free will. To what extent was individual man free to make choices in an age of universal conflagration and oppressive political regimes. The world was growing more insecure, threatening, and terrible, and the chorus spoke for ordinary people caught up in dangerous predicaments not of their own making. Even today, if we look at a COVIDified environment, we may look back at the play and say, all right, this is my problem too. So modernism, or the modern, not modernism, I'm sorry, the modern significance of the play looms large. So the nature of martyrdom of Thomas A. Becket is remote even from the experience of the committed Christian. But the mingling of strength and weakness in an individual is of universal interest, irrespective of your religion, irrespective of your beliefs. The mingling of strength and weakness in an individual becomes universal. And in his greatness, a martyr forces decision upon himself and upon others. The whole tenor of a struggle is to move its significance away from the personal and the particular to the impersonal and the general, from a potential saint obsessed with his own sanctity to the acknowledgement of being the agent of destiny. Thomas' inner struggle may be, sorry, maybe the least popular aspect of the theme, but the play tells us not to judge the act of martyrdom by external appearances, but by internal integrity. Beckett's external behavior puzzles witnesses within the play, and his motivation is bewildering or even mad according to the man in the street logic of the Knights. But doing the right deed for the wrong reason is hardly an extraordinary or exceptional experience, and this gives the play a wider meaning for the non-believer, countering the proposition that you have to be a Christian to enjoy the Christian play. That's where Eliot tries to be different. Because the theme is universal, or of an universal appeal, the play appeals to all of us alike, or should appeal to all of us alike, despite its Christian elements. So nevertheless, one of his major objectives was the dramatization of the place of religion in modern lives, because he had already by then become a staunch believer. While the popularity of the play may be traced partly to the relevance of the man against state confrontation and to the problems of the individual conscience, the religious nature of the central experience is unmistakable. An awareness of good and evil pervades the play. The agony of the chorus, as we have been discussing so far, the agony of the play, the agony of the chorus is derived from a sense of growing evil and from a need to purge the stained from their being. A sense of impending damnation forces them to a decision. Despite the location of the original production in a cathedral, Eliot could not depend upon there being an accepted body of Christian beliefs in his audience, and his use of Christian concepts and symbols is restrained so that there is no fervor of fanaticism in the play, but rather an earnest assertion. For believer and non-believer alike, the strength of the play lies in its awareness of doubts, of backsliding, of loss of perception and purpose, and lack of commitment. A particular religious or political view does not necessarily make a piece of good literature good, and above all, in a play, it is the dramatic form which recommends it to the audiences. And as you know, structurally, the play is dominated by Beckett's determination to achieve God's purpose, whatever the cost, and by the chorus' terrified anticipation of changed circumstances. The dramatic link between the two is death, and Thomas welcomes it while the chorus fear it. The relationship of Thomas and the chorus is the key element in the play. He restores to their lives meaning which they had lost, and through his death, they replace their awareness of hell on earth with a final sense of fulfillment. His significance is thrust into their world, repeating Christ's sacrifice to remind them that God has entered history. So, even in the modern world, while the significance of religious belief was waning, he reminds us of how God has entered the sphere. Now, just in case you haven't read the play, just in case you don't know the story, I'd like to quickly brief the story for you, because in between, while I was briefing, even though I can see none of your faces and most of you are muted, unlike an offline class where I could look at your face and tune my lecture accordingly, I do understand that online classes are handicapped in varied ways. But I do believe that at least some of you may still be blank in terms of what the play is all about. So while I try to explain the play to you, it would be sheerly stupid to simply go on describing the facets. So far, so good, because I was speaking about the historicity and you could still make some sense. But in order to proceed further, irrespective of whether we would do so tomorrow or today, I would like to give you a brief plot or a brief summary of the story so that you can understand it better. So what happens in the play? The play describes the final phase of Thomas A. Becket's life. His past, his relationship with the king, and the conflict between church and state are largely sketched into the contributions from the tempters, although the tense opening choruses do stress the struggle between the archbishop and the king. The hint of crisis comes very early, and despite criticisms of the play, which stress a ritual and static impression, it solves problems of narrative exposition and developing action very economically, while the theme is given extensive treatment. For his exposition, Eliot was able to assume that most people who went to see the play knew the story in its basic essentials. Beckett's legend is not something that you don't know generally. If you are a Christian, if you are in England, you would be familiar with it. So he also anticipated that the audience are aware of the plot. And the story is simple enough. To put it in, say, 4 to 5 sentences, the Archbishop returns from France to lead his church, determined to face the possibility of conflict with the king. Despite advice to the contrary from his attendant priests, and despite the evident fears of the ordinary women of Canterbury, which marks the chorus. The ordinary women of Canterbury become the chorus, mind you. So, despite the fears of priests and chorus, the Archbishop returns from France to lead the church. And um, just a second. All right, that's just a data warning. Okay. So he returns to Canterbury. He preaches a Christmas Day sermon on martyrdom, and after further vain attempts by his priests to prevent his death, he is killed by 4 drunken knights. The story is as simple as that. There is foreshadowing throughout the play. Just in case you don't know what foreshadowing is, you may go back and Google that, FORESHADOWING. So foreshadowing is a literary technique wherein right from the beginning you get hints to what's going to happen next. So the martyrdom of Becket is anticipated right from the beginning of the play. So there have been warnings from the priests as well as the chorus, and despite that he continues. He himself pre-anticipates his martyrdom. There is an interlude in the play. We'll discuss the politics of that later. There is an interlude by Eliot in the play in which Becket speaks about the valor of martyrdom, and finally he is killed by 4 drunken knights who claim to be following the king's orders. So instead of widening the narrative span, the dramatist chose to concern his action with a very narrow point of decision, an interior action with a very powerful impact. Oh my God, we still have people flocking. Okay, let me just get them in. All right. So the story embodies the theme without moralizing. That's why it's a bit different. It does not go into the preaching mode. So parts 1 and 2 are not didactic. That's a point to be noted. And the sermon is only partly so. It's not completely didactic. And Eliot relied on minimal stage directions, and the whole presentation has a universality beyond its historical setting. And when you look at the structure of that play, its dramatic effect is quite different from that of situation plays, and its form is important in organizing the response of the audience. A simple line of action without digression, parallel plot, or subplot is graced with the ceremonial grandeur of a ritual. As I told you already, he tries to bring back the ritualistic form into theatre. The pattern of the play is one of development, contrast, and balance. And like a church service, the various phases contain the true action of the play. It's like a communion or mass, and it provides a symbolic pattern of dynamic emotional changes. A process of purgation leads to a state in which Thomas may make perfect his will, and the chorus may identify with the event. The parallels between play and service were increased by the inclusion of the sermon at the midway point, that is, the interlude, in the cathedral setting, and the use of the great liturgical passages as links and accompaniments. The emotional structure of the play may be traced in the choruses, which move from terror and doubts and rapture and a recognition of God's glory. The choices of Thomas and for us are seen from different angles throughout the play. His moments of decision in parts 1 and 2 are crucial points which cannot be fully presented on stage. In naturalistic terms, we have to take Thomas' word for his achievement of true martyrdom. He discovers the impurity of his motives in part 1, while part 2 proves that Becket has virtuously and correctly made his submission to destiny, the destiny of God and God's will. And as I told you, there are 3 parts specifically in the play. And when I say 3 parts, there is part 1, there is part 2, and in between these 2 parts, we have something called an interlude. So again, I'd like to spend some time briefing that to you, because having a thorough understanding of this play is significant. Because this is one play which is a sure bet, just like Hamlet or, say, for example, Dr. Faustus. So to have a proper understanding is essential, and that's why I'm spending that extra amount of effort behind this play. So please don't think that I'm overdoing the same thing again and again. When I repeat certain facts, I do it so because the repeated explanation demands it. Whenever I discuss certain facts have to be recalled upon time and again. And so, as I told you, the play or the parts of the play can be divided into 3: part 1, part 2, and in between that we have an interlude. I have already told you what it is about. Part 1, you have the return of the Archbishop, and then in between we have his preachings on martyrdom, and finally he is assassinated. So further elaborating on that, the first part is constructed. So that's where I would also like to speak about the Greek influences in the play. I'll also come back to it in detail later. So the first part is constructed in the fashion of a Greek verbal conflict, consisting largely of duologues with contributions from a chorus with a focus on 4 temptations. The most dramatic passage presents the surprise 4th temptation when Thomas' decision is threatened by self-will and pride. So in the first part, there are these 4 temptations that Thomas is tempted with, and he withstands all those temptations, though not completely. And the dramatic center of the play starts at 1665. And when the drama, and then from there on, the drama takes a fundamental change in the course of action. The action of part 1 is primarily a matter of mind, and the chorus is full of doubts and fears, while Thomas, having rejected the past, is tempted by his own forward-looking ambitions. And what happens after that is the interlude. The sermon in the interlude by Becket is direct, and prose is being resorted to. It's a prosaic exposition of the awareness Becket has attained towards the end of part 1. And it makes clear the nature of triumph over the 4th tempter. It expresses the view that a martyrdom cannot be achieved by man's will alone. It therefore establishes the theme of the play by means of a different dramatic mode. When the future martyr has subdued his own ambitions and will to God's will, he becomes a fit instrument for God's purpose. In a cool, intellectual passion, it links the poetic sequences of the parts on either side. Beckett's telling his congregation that he will not preach to them again prepares the way for the events of part 2. And again, look at the foreshadowing elements there. He says that I shall not preach to you again, means he pre-anticipates his martyrdom or his murder, his assassination. And part 2 prepares for this. So the action of part 2 contrasts with that of part 1, where we have an internal intellectual problem followed by a sequence of action and comment. In part 2, the focus is murder, and the play generates preparatory emotions. For example, apprehension by the chorus, accusation by the knights, and protection by the priests. There is this tri-level scenario happening in part 2. I'd like to repeat that again for emphasis. Apprehension by the chorus. Apprehension means fear. Then accusation by the knights. They accuse that Becket has not served the state or the ruler's interests. And third is protection by the priests. The priests who tell the accounts of martyrdom or the murder of Becket later to saint or holify Becket through their accounts, which Eliot has also based his works on. The balance of responsibility now becomes important in Beckett's refusal to seek sanctuary. He does not apologize. He does not seek asylum at the king's feet. For example, he does not do a shuarkar. You know who a shuarkar is, right? A person to whom the Times apologized after 5 years for publishing an article on his apologetic nature. Yeah, an RSS bandwagon. So nothing else to be expected from a magazine brought forward by Malayalam Manorama. Naturally, they are much worse than Shuarkar. And I would also like to remind you of that sequence in Kalapani, where this guy licks the boots of the Britishers. Nonetheless, going back to our story at hand, rather than digressing to political factors, Becket does not do a Savarkar. What Becket does is he refuses to lick the king's boots, and his refusal is definitely one of the central moments in part 2. So later, the knights are to claim that his failure to run amounts to suicide, thereby ignoring their own independence as agents of death. So in the end, the charge is that Thomas should have compromised between the political and religious demands placed upon him, and the limited scope of these charges reflects the limitations of the earthly, non-spiritual viewpoint. Part 2 expands and embodies the conclusions Becket himself came to in part 1. Actions become suffering as he foresaw. If dramatically it lacks development, theatrically it uses bold strokes. Priests in procession with banners, the angry intrusion of murderers, outsiders, a ritual killing, the great liturgies, and Te Deum, as I told you, praising the Lord, and the knight's Shavian apology in the fashion of the last act of Saint Joanne. Again, a play I would like to remind you. Again, as I told you, that's one play I missed out. George Bernard Shaw had before this written a biographical play, glorifying martyrdom of Saint Joanne. Another play that you can compare Murder in the Cathedral with for your final exam essay. If the question is about martyrdom of Becket, this is another contemporary play that you can compare with. But the difference is Saint Joanne is chronological. It has deep character revelation, and there's plenty of action, and it's more about the entire history of Saint Joanne. But here the emphasis is on the sacrifice made by Becket, and that's why Murder in the Cathedral becomes different. And even though he follows the Greek tradition, he does not strictly adhere to the unities of time and play. time and place, and he has his own ways of doing these things. And in the two phases of temptation and murder, the concentration is laid on the tension, and it's well maintained by Eliot. And if you look at the characterization, again, you would also feel that he has well etched Thomas in the play. And unlike, say, for example, Tennessee Williams or Jean Anouilh, he does not go on to detail Henry II. The king barely makes much appearances on stage. It's about Becket and his actions. It's more Becket centric than, say, an elaboration of the conflict. So that's another thing that distinguishes Eliot's play. And that's one reason why you should again celebrate the play. Speaking about the chorus, without which we cannot actually conclude this play, uh, the murder in the cathedral proves what a useful device the chorus can be in the modern theatre. Remember, we were speaking about chorus in the ancient classical Greek theatre. So in the modern theatre too, Eliot proves that chorus can be a useful tool. And as I've already told you, he has used the chorus effectively in his other plays too. And the chorus, as you know, has several functions. It contrasts with Beckett's elevated concerns, represents humanity, embodies the theme, acts as commentator and observer, creates mood and atmosphere, and sustains much of the narrative. The affirmative transfiguration of the chorus in part 2 is the true thematic climax of the play. And mind you, unlike the traditional Greek chorus, we have a full female chorus in Eliot's play. So the chorus is Greek in form and function, adding to the ritualistic element in the play. But its prominent role as an intermediary makes it seem less than stylized when it comes to Eliot. The emotions expressed by the chorus are an apparatus of Thomas' progress, are an indicator. In the end, the women of Canterbury recognize their weakness as a sin and realize that evil exists, but that it may be defeated. Their responses parallel Beckett's experience without his awareness and courage, but without them, Becket would not work out his own crucial decisions. Without Becket, they would put up with tyrannical oppression and settle for a quiet life. At the opening scene, we see that women of Canterbury are reluctant to be involved. The chorus is divided, preferring unobtrusive acceptance of their limited daily round. We can see so many Arashtriya Buddhijeevis around us. People who prefer not to meddle out in any of the issues around them. Even when there is a farmer's strike, we sit home easily ordering something from McDonald's. So the women were initially averse to such, averse to get involved to such activities happening around them. But the saint compels them to a commitment to faith. The early fears make them more human and not less sympathetic. The seasons, the harvests, the problems of everyday life are preferable to the grandeur challenges involved in the conflict of Archbishop and the king. Ultimately, they are brought to a recognition that they too are an integral part of the design of human and divine relationships. Their salvation is achieved by witnessing, by nothing more dynamic than being there and saying yes. Thomas' knowledge of the need for God is transferred to them. There are so many critics who have argued that women do not do enough to gain this wisdom for themselves and do not illuminate their experience with real understanding. They even use Beckett's own language to express their enlightenment at the end. But their joint anonymity enables them to cross the centuries, medieval and modern, representative of ordinary human level of reality, as well as acting as observers in the fashion of a Greek chorus. They constitute the touchstone of the play, the past, present, and future witnesses of the event. We live through their reactions and participate in the drama through them and perhaps with them. In history, they represent all humanity faced with an unpalatable and unlooked for contemporary situation, and in religious terms, a development from the compromises of accepting second best to some identification with Beckett's vision. The journey is conveyed in 6 long choruses, and their experience is expressed in non Christian, non theological terms. It seems excessive to ask for even more dramatically from the chorus, as if it were possible to incorporate developments more proper to an individual character. And also to note the language used by Eliot. In a way, you could say that that is anachronistic, because he does not he does not depend on the age of Beckett and the language during those times, because he knew that the modern sensibilities will not understand or appreciate the language of those times. So he resorted to a modern dialogue narrative, and he supposed that the audience would let him forgive him for that act. And I think I have almost covered the core thing. And maybe one more thing that I need to cover is the question in your assignment. What do you call Murder in the Cathedral as a verse drama. So I think I'll give my throat a little bit of rest. We can have 10 minutes of Q&A. And tomorrow, I won't take much long. I think I have almost covered most of the aspects. Only even this aspect I have touched a bit. Murder in the Cathedral as a verse drama. But then I shall spend 10 to 15 minutes tomorrow to discuss the play as a drama in verse and Eliot's vision behind it and how that functions in those lines. And let's spend, say, close to 10 minutes discussing the concepts of Eliot. And if you have any further queries, I'm all ears to that as well. And Neha Sharma has been constantly asking a link to WhatsApp group. Any admins over there, Anju, or anybody who's in charge of that? Yeah, Surya Kartika has shared the link with you. Neha, thank you, Surya, for volunteering and helping her. Neha, you may join that link and help yourselves in that mission. So be a part of that group and have all the fun. Okay, so apart from that, yeah, the floor is open. If you have any queries, feel free to ask. We have 10 minutes, and I apologize once again for having a, say, 110-minute long lecture. But as you might have understood by now, it was unavoidable. I couldn't have resorted to any other means to convey these many things to you in such a short span of time. And mind you, still it's incomplete. I tried to be a little bit quicker today so as to finish it by today itself, but then that didn't work. Maybe I saved 15 minutes. Yes, Mary.
So I read somewhere that Henry actually did not want to kill Becket. He just says, "Will someone rid me of this priest?" And if it is the knights, this one, why wasn't? I mean, like he's made a martyr because of that, or did the king really feel sorry, or was it? I didn't understand the reason why he was. I mean, he actually gets lashes also for as a punishment. But I was he genuinely involved in it, or like I don't, he didn't want to antagonize the people against him.
All right, I did get your question, Nirubama. Let me put it this way. Our discussion on the play is not complete yet. So tomorrow I'll be discussing this point, but then I can give you a brief answer as of now. The critics are divided ever since the beginning regarding the martyrdom of Becket. Because, for example, if you know that if you die, you would become a saint, and you commit to that death, are you being selfish or are you dying for that cause? This is a question that's always there. And we know that Becket knew that he would be murdered. And despite that, he chose his death. So is that martyrdom, or is that cowardice, or is that a pre-planned thing? Is something that the critical world is divided upon. But nonetheless, relationship between Henry and Becket is a debatable thing too. But then also one more thing that you need to remember is that they used to be friends initially. We are addressing the case point from Becket's return from France. But before that, we must remember that they stayed together in England and they were good friends. And Becket had to escape from England, fearing that Henry would do some harm to him. And later, because he got some reassurance, he came back to England. And within a short span of time, he was murdered. And mind you, the knights are drunk. And drunken men and insane people have the liberty to do anything to anybody. And the knights may use the excuse of having drunk to have assassinated the king. So that's also another perspective regarding the same. And also, we must note that there are also points historically where Eliot has played with. For example, in reality, after assassinating Becket, the knights went away. They did not attempt to speak anything about it, even though they claimed that they assassinated Becket on the name of king. But then in the play, Eliot makes them speak in prose and makes them feel repentant for having assassinated Becket. So that's an intervention made by Eliot. Maybe the Anglican in Eliot, maybe the believer in Eliot, makes these knights a mouthpiece of martyrdom of Becket. So that's another thing that we would come back to tomorrow, hopefully, after quickly discussing the verse used by Eliot in the play, the structure that, or the writing style that he has used in the play. All right.
Okay. Sir,
Yes, Sridevi.
normally chorus you said are wise men. Okay, normally wise men are
Yeah.
considered for this chorus part. Here, women are used as chorus. Why?
Yep. That's Eliot's choice, and you have just seen that women are used as chorus. You must also see that in the play, right from the beginning, women are not wise women per se, but they are confused. They pre-anticipate Beckett's death, and like I told you initially, they are averse to the what's happening around them. They don't want to be a part of it and suffer, and gradually a transformation occurs to them. And as they witness Becket being assassinated, they undergo that transformation. And probably Becket has used them as symbols because, uh, he wanted to subvert the classical Greek notion of male chorus as wise men who would have a say in the play. You could see that right from the beginning they were confused whether to take part or not. So he has played or toyed with the Greek conventions while having his chorus. But
I
yes,
guess
there are also plays where he has the chorus who are male. So that's up to you to figure out. Read those plays and figure out why he plays with the chorus in various ways.
I
That would
guess he
definitely
used
make for a good
women as
research
chorus.
article, perhaps.
Sorry, sir. Sorry, sir. I guess he must have used women as chorus because maybe he's influenced by his mother who used to advocate human rights, women's rights.
Possible. As Matthew Arnold says, once the person is dead, we can only speculate. That person would smile and do not answer. So that's a possibility. But on that positive note, just like I mentioned right now, there is one thing I would like to share with you. As postgraduate learners of English, if you intend to become teachers, that is, if you intend to be academicians per se, you must try your hands at publishing as well. And when I say publishing, I'm not referring simply to creative pursuits like poetry or novel, etc. But I'm also speaking about academic research. Because as distant learners of IGNU, that's one thing that you compromise on. The other day, while I was taking class for that group of choice papers, optional papers, I was telling them too that in India, in any university or in any college, the MA students come across 20 papers across 4 semesters over 2 years. And apart from these 20 papers, they have to do a project. They have to write a project consisting of 3 chapters, an introduction and a conclusion, following the MLA format. And they will also have a Viva OC to defend their project. And you are lacking in all these, and you have only 8 papers, mind you. So if you go to the job market, the comparison would definitely come. And the one handicap that you face, apart from the fact that you are a distant learner, maybe you are a girl or whatever, another problem that you may come across is that they may ask about your research aptitude. And if you don't do it yourself, you'd feel handicapped or crippled. So it's high time you try to have that research aptitude. There are plenty of courses offered in Udemy and edX and all in research aptitude. Try to have that. Try to develop some inquisitive thinking, critical thinking, and try to write a few articles. Send it to journals, especially the UGC care listed journals. Just in case you are not aware of that, you can Google that. UGC care listed journals. In our case, the genre is humanities. The publications would do you good stead when you apply for a job vacancy. And it's not that difficult to do. If you can put in some time for research and reading, it's a cakewalk. And you should try for that. It can even be multidisciplinary. For example, if you are from a political science background, you can study a text with the theories that you have learned from political science. These days, interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary research is quite encouraged. Especially, I have done a lot of collaboration with my colleagues in the Department of Behavioral Sciences, that's psychology, or MCA, or library sciences, and so on. Currently, I'm working on an article on a concept titled Finance Museum, that is a museum within the library structure. So such research is often encouraged in the academia too. And that would also help you get published in Scopus or Q and Q2 journals, which is not available in English arts and science journals. We only have Care List. So you can have Scopus publications if you collaborate with other groups as well. So that's another possibility that I wanted to point you to, because I'm sure that will help you a lot. All right, I heard somebody unmuting themselves. They didn't ask anything. The floor is open. Somebody was trying to ask something? Maybe, maybe not. All right. So in case if there are no questions, we'll call it a day. Tomorrow we'll come back and complete Murder in the Cathedral and move on to Look Back in Anger by John Osborne. Again, there are some background. You may go back today, maybe to save some time. You can Google Angry Young Man Movement, or you can even go back to the glossary of M.H. Abrams, and you may look at the Angry Young Man Movement, and you may get to see what it is. Nirupama, have you left or are you here? Nirupama? Nirupama? Okay, doesn't matter. It seems she is gone. I've already told you, you may also refer to the glossary. Not only of M.H. Abrams, there are plenty of glossaries. You may also refer to the glossary of literary terms in order to improve your knowledge regarding MEG 1, 2, or 3. So, yeah, would publishing stories or poems will have same effect? Not exactly, Joel. Fortunately or unfortunately, even though we study literature, people don't give us that much of a weight when we write stories and poems and novels. Maybe unless and until we win a prestigious prize like a Booker Prize or something, or Sahitya Academy Award or something. They don't really give us that much of a value. Also because these days self-publishing is immensely in vogue. There are plenty of avenues wherein we can publish our own books for free. So there are plenty of self-proclaimed touted authors. So I'm not discouraging you. If you write well, all the best. That will also help you. At least you can have a few 3 to 4 bullet points in your resume. So that's not bad. But at the same time, it does not enjoy the same status as, say, an academic journal article. So I would always prefer the academic research article over a poem or a play or a novel. Though I admit that the latter is more superior to the former in terms of creative pursuits and to the beneficiality of the domain that is literature. So, yeah. So thank you very much, guys. We are running out of time, and considering that there are no further questions, we'll call it a day. See you tomorrow. Thank you so much for your patient listening. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank